When the sun tilts toward the west and the sky fills with faded gold and violet smoke, Britain breathes a little deeper. The air on the hilltops grows heavy, as though the earth itself is holding its breath. The ancient forests begin to whisper, quietly, persistently. This is not just wind moving through the leaves. This is memory. The memory of the land, the memory of its spirits, the memory of time itself. In that thin space between daylight and the coming dark, when the birds have gone quiet and the fireflies have not yet woken, a different kind of sound begins. The dry crack of a branch beneath a fox's paw, the faint rattle of a chain on a forgotten chapel, a rustling in the undergrowth that carries more than sound, more than meaning. It carries a story. In these moments, beside the hearth fires that warm moss-thatched homes and great stone halls alike, old words come alive again. Words woven from lies and truth, from fear and hope, from blood and light. Tonight you will hear one of them, a story that was not born in a single day. A story that may still life in every stone, in every rain puddle, in every forgotten alley in London. This is the story of a boy who did not know his own name until his name called out to him. A king without a crown, a warrior without a sword, a hope born from darkness. This is the story of Arthur. Part 1. The Merlin and the Prophecy, but long before the sword, gleamed in the stone beneath the morning. Sun long before Camelot, before the round table, before the knights, before the songs. Story began with a vision. Somewhere deep in the forest, among trees as old as night itself, there stood an ancient man. His robes were rough wool and dried leaves. His eyes looked beyond the edges of our time. People called him many things. The madman, the prophet, the hermit, but history would remember his name as Merlin. He stood at the base of a great ring of standing stones, a staff smoldering gently in his hand. Not as a weapon, not as a walking stick, but as a key. Between the stones, mist crept in, not ordinary mist, but the kind that carries images, and Merlin saw. He saw a throne wreathed in flame, and a child traced in a single drop of blood. He saw blood upon the earth, and banners in the wind crying out for war. He saw a boy in a torn shirt, and behind his eyes a star already burning. Britain was tearing itself apart. Kings rose and fell like leaves in autumn wind. The people were forgetting the old ways, forgetting their bond with the land, with the forests, with the spirits. But the balance still held by a single thread, and that thread ran through Merlin's staff. He knew the time had come, the time for a king, not a tyrant, not a conqueror, not a lover of martial glory, but someone who would serve the land, someone who would listen, not only speak, someone who would know fear and pain, and choose the light anyway. And so in the wet forest, over the embers of a dying fire, Merlin began to weave, not with words but with thought, not with gesture but with spirit. He planted the seed of a story. And the earth, drifting beneath the fog, listened. Part 2. The birth of Arthur. King Uther Pendragon was powerful. His sword was celebrated in ballads. His enemies trembled at the mere sound of his name. But alongside his strength lived another shadow silence. In the longest winter nights, in his chambers draped with tapestries and hung with battle trophies, he would sit and listen to that quiet. It wasn't the voice of an enemy that troubled him. It was emptiness. He was alone. Through the firelight, through the gleam of his crown, he searched for something, a gaze that was warm, familiar, and free from the weight of a throne. He searched for an heir. His kingdom grew, but so did the threat. Without a successor, after his death would come chaos. And then one evening he saw her. A woman who seemed to have stepped out of legend itself, Igraine, beautiful, untouchable. The wife of one of his proudest vassals, the Duke of Tintagel. He could not forget her. Not that morning, not days later. In her voice he heard the ocean. In her movements the rhythm of ancient dances, and in her eyes a quiet knowledge of something he himself had lost. But Igraine was beyond reach. Any step toward her was a step toward war. And so he called for Merlin. "Help me," said Uther, "not as a king, as a man." Merlin was silent for a long time. "This union will bring the world a great king," he finally said, "but you must give him to me. The son will not be yours. He will belong to Britain." The king clenched his fists and nodded. And Merlin began his work. On the night when thunder split the sky, when waves crashed against the cliffs of Tintagel, when warriors prepared for battle at the castle's walls, Merlin changed Uther's face. The king entered the fortress not as an enemy, but wearing the duke's own likeness, and Igraine, deceived by the enchantment, let him in. Beneath the crack of storms and the ring of swords, that night a boy was conceived. His name was destined to become a legend, Arthur, but Merlin did not forget his condition. "He must not know the throne," he said. "Power discovered too soon turns a heart to stone. I need a sword that knows how to be a tree." And so, when Igraine gave birth, the infant was taken from the palace, carried into the mist in secret under cover of night. He was placed in the care of a simple man, but one noble in spirit, Sir Ector. Sir Ector was a knight of the old school. He never boasted of his rank. His home was a fortress only to those seeking justice, and there Arthur began his life. He did not know who he was. His childhood was modest, but not poor, mood games and wooden sword fights. Riding lessons and hunting, fireside tales, he was an ordinary boy, and yet there was a grace in his movements, a strange steadiness in his voice, a goodness in his choices that could not be taught. Sir Ector loved him like his own, and though he sometimes sensed something in the boy that defied explanation, he never asked questions. At night Arthur dreamed. The dreams came rarely, but they burned bright like a distant fire against a midnight forest in them, a castle consumed by flame, a woman rising from a mirror-still lake, with waves turning slowly in her eyes, a sword standing upright in stone, shining with first light. And beside it an old man with a hooded staff, whose face was hidden but whose presence raised every hair on Arthur's skin. He would wake with his heart pounding. He didn't understand the images, didn't know where they came from, but somewhere deep inside he felt it. This matters. He didn't know it yet, but it was a calling, not a voice, not a prophecy. It was blood remembering its destiny. Memory that runs deeper than words. A purpose that had already opened its eyes and was waiting for him to open his. Part 3. The Sword in the Stone. Years passed. Decades, swift as a flash of steel in dim light, King Pendragon, the great conqueror, the ruler, was gone. Some said he fell by an enemy's hand, others whispered it was grief that took him. But one thing was certain, he departed without naming an heir, and with him went order. Britain, once bound by his iron will, fractured. Lords, dukes, barons, anyone who owned a scrap of land rushed to declare themselves king. The crown became an empty sound. Everyone had one. Castles burned. Fortresses were besieged by neighbors. Roads that had been guarded grew over with grace and fear. People were afraid to travel. Trade stopped. No one trusted anyone, but amid the ashes, hope remained. Merlin watched. He did not intervene in the quarrels. He chose no sides, like an ancient oak. He stood above the wind. But in his eyes was reflected more than the earth could see. He knew the time had come. And so, among the ruins of great Londinium, among the old walls where Romans had once poured bronze and blood, he ordered a stone to be placed, massive, black as a starless night. And from it rose a blade, deep as if the stone itself had given birth to it. Etched along the steel were the words, "Whoso pulleth out this sword from this stone is the rightwise born king of all Britain." The rumor spread like a gust of wind across the plains. Lords sent their finest knights. Men in armor arrived with trophies and banners, with musicians and priests. One by one they gathered in the square. One by one they tried. One screamed, gripping the hilt until his knuckles turned white, another prayed on his knees, a third hitched horses to it. Some called upon the old gods, some upon the new. The sword did not move. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. The stone became a pilgrimage site, then an arena, then almost a joke, but the prophecy remained silent. And then, on the day of a great tournament, when knights had gathered again to test their strength, two unremarkable riders arrived in Londinium, a young man named Arthur and his foster brother Kay. They had come not as heroes, not as messengers of fate, simply as spectators. Kay, proud and sharp-tongued, was meant to compete, but an hour before the event he realized his sword was missing. Arthur, he called, run and find me another, quickly. Arthur, ever loyal, ever willing, ran. He darted between stalls, searched for weapon sellers, but everything was taken or locked up, and then he turned down an alleyway, stepped into the square, and saw the stone. He didn't know about the prophecy. He hadn't heard the stories of that particular sword. He simply saw a blade that no one seemed to be using. And he thought, if nobody wants it, I suppose it's free. He walked up. No one was watching. He placed his hand on the hilt, and without effort, without struggle, without strain, he drew it free. The sword slid from the stone as easily as an arrow from a quiver. A cry from behind him. People began rushing over. Their faces twisted first in anger. What do you think you're doing? Then disbelief, then silence. Who are you? Someone asked. The boy blinked, a little confused. I'm Arthur, son of Sir Ector, the crowd murmured. Savon scoffed. Savon laughed. Coincidence. A trick. He just got there first. Make him do it again. Arthur, flush-terred, placed the sword back into the stone and drew it out again, and again. The sword obeyed only him. Not a single knight, not a single highborn lord could move it a single inch. At the edge of the square stood a man in a grey cloak, nearly lost in the crowd. He made no sound, no gesture. He only smiled very quietly. It was Merlin. He had known who this boy was since the night he carried him away from Igraine. He had been waiting for this day. From that moment history changed. Reluctantly at first. Some lords refused to kneel before what they called a peasant boy, but the sword stayed silent for them. And the people began to see something different in Arthur, something they couldn't name but couldn't look away from. He was calm. There was no pride in his words, but there was truth in his actions. And so a new era began. Not of swords, but of duty, the era of Camelot. The era of a king born in secret who would bring the light. Part 4. Camelot and the Round Table. Weeks passed since the sword was drawn, but the fairy tale, it turned out, was only the beginning. While common folk sang songs about the young chosen one, while children drew figures with swords on dusty walls, the real Britain remained cold and skeptical. The land was torn apart not just by blades, but by pride and ambition. Lords accustomed to their castles, to tribute, to power, looked at Arthur as a threat. A boy they set behind closed doors. No family, no name, no birthright. Some laughed, some armed themselves. The first reports of uprisings came from the northern lands, others from Wales. Too many hearts refused to accept a king they had not chosen. And in each of those hearts, danger was taking root. Arthur knew this. He was not naive. But he did not respond with threats or iron. He went back to what Merlin had told him. Strength is not in swords, the old man had said, standing at a fire in the fading evening. Strength is in who can hear. I'm not sure I know how, Arthur had admitted shortly. Then learn, go, look, listen. Only then will you become a king not by right, but by nature. And so Arthur went. He did not sit in a tower issuing decrees. He saddled his horse and rode. He stopped in villages, at yet the same tables as farmers, mended armor himself when no squire was there, listened to women who had lost husbands to war, helped unload carts, walked through groves with hermits, slept in monasteries no lord had ever visited. When knights came to him, they found not a throne, but a man. In his eyes there was no anger, but there was resolve. He did not demand loyalty. It was given freely, one by one they came. Sir Bedivere, the old veteran who had lost an arm but not his dignity. Sir Kay, his foster brother, jealous at first, then devoted. Sir Gawain, hot-madded but fair. Sir Pellinore, the seeker of monsters, and finally on a ship that arrived from across the sea carrying a banner that had flown beneath a foreign sun, came the one they would remember most. Lancelot, a noble wandering knight. He had heard the stories, and he wanted to see for himself. He approached Arthur without bowing, but when he looked at the king, he bent his knee on his own. "You don't look like a king," he said. "Good," Arthur replied. "I don't want to look like one, I want to be one." Then Merlin, sensing the moment had ripened, unrolled an old scroll. On it was drawn a table, not long and rectangular as rulers used, but round. "This will be your sign," said Merlin. "Here, no one sits higher than another. Not you, not them, not even me." "Even you, king," Merlin nodded. "You are first among equals. This is how the New Britain begins." And so the Round Table was born. The first council was held in a forest clearing, beneath the canopy of oak trees, without weapons. They spoke not of conquest but of justice, not of enemies but of the value of peace. Each knight swore an oath, not of blind obedience but of dedication to an ideal. But ideals are like light in a cave, they are visible from far away. And for those who have learned to live in darkness, they are painful to the eyes. In the north, a lord named Vortigern was rising. He was old, but his name still inspired fear. He did not accept Arthur. He called him a pretender. He gathered an army. The night before the battle was called. Warriors sat sharpening their blades in silence, writing letters to their families. Arthur sat by the fire, alone with the torches out. Merlin came to him. "Tomorrow you will learn the price of your name," the old man said. "I am not afraid for myself," Arthur replied. "I am afraid of killing what I'm living for." Merlin was quiet for a moment. "Your bloodline is not your strength. Your truth is, if it holds, nothing will break you." The next morning, Arthur did not order the charge. He rode out alone ahead of his army, and he spoke. Even those who had come to kill him could hear him. He spoke of a land greater than any war. Of a country where lords were not masters, but servants of honor, forgiveness, and a new world. When the battle finally began, it did not last long. Vortigern fought with fury. But Arthur did not strike him down. He stopped his sword. He lowered it. "Kill me," said Vortigern. "I am not offering you death," Arthur replied. "I am offering you a place at the table." And Vortigern knelt. So was the first enemy of the New Britain defeated, not by force, but by justice. Part 5. Excalibur and the Lady of the Lackey. Camelot rose above the land like a lighthouse of hope. With each passing year, Arthur became more than a king, he became a legend. Every victory strengthened his rule, every alliance extended his reach. The borders of Britain were now drawn not by swords, but by respect. But with each conquered peace, with each triumphant night, Arthur felt something else drawing closer. Not rage, not rebellion, a shadow. It had no face, it did not come with a sword. But its presence was felt at the edge of sleep, in the silence of forests, in the eyes of seers. The enemies across the seas grew more cunning, more strange. They whispered incantations instead of battle cries. Arthur could see it. The world was changing. And the sword forged by human hands would no longer be enough. Merlin had known this before him. He had stayed silent for a long time, until one evening, when the quiet of Camelot felt like the breathing of some great sleeping beast, he came to Arthur and said, "It is time. Time for what?" "Where?" Arthur asked. "To a place with no names on any map, no people, only origins, where the water knows more than all the wise men, alone, because only solitude cuts away everything unnecessary and shows you who you truly are." And so Arthur saddled his horse and rode before dawn. He told no one, only the wind knew his path. He rode through misty valleys where grass touched the stirrups, through ancient groves where the trees whispered in languages no one had spoken for 1,000 years. He rode toward the place where the world had not yet decided, whether to be a dream or waking life. And one morning, in the grey half-light before sunrise, he came upon a lake. It lay among the rocks, like the eye of an ancient creature. Mist curled over the water, reflecting the light as if the sun were breathing from below. The air was so thick with stillness that even the beat of his own heart felt like a shout. Arthur dismounted. He walked to the water's edge. And then, like a flash in slow time, a hand rose from the depths, white as marble, slender but strong, holding a sword. Its blade did not shine with light, it shone with meaning. And following the hand, a woman, beautiful in a way that did not belong to the world of men. Her gown was woven from water, her hair from kelp and light. And her eyes were like bottomless wells in which not answers but questions drowned. You have not come for glory, she said. Her voice did not sound, it vibrated, in every blade of grass, in every pebble. That is why you are worthy. She stepped closer. The water did not ripple, not even a tremor. Arthur stretched out his hand, not as a warrior, but as a student, and took the sword. It was heavy, but not with weight. It lay in his hand like truth, impossible to lift lightly and yet necessary. Its name is Excalibur, said the Lady of the Lake. It was not made for killing. It was made to give power to the one who knows how to hold it without clenching. If your truth is strong, it will always be sharp. If it wavers, it will go dark. Arthur bowed to her. He didn't know if it was ritual, he only knew it was right, and then she was gone. The hand, the mist, the stillness, all of it vanished. He returned to Camelot that evening. Excalibur hung at his side. Its blade did not glow, but every warrior who saw it stepped back, not from fear, from something they couldn't name, a feeling that this sword spoke even in silence. Merlin met him at the gate. He asked nothing, only nodded. One knot of fate has been tied, he said shyly, but many threads still lie ahead. Part 6, Guinevere. After the lake, Arthur changed. He spoke little, but each word carried more weight than a book of laws. His knights could feel the shift. The people felt a peace they had no name for. Only Merlin, watching the king, understood. Beneath all this, loneliness was growing. He was king of an entire country, but he belonged to no one. In the south, in the lands of King Leo the Grand, there was a long-running dispute over borders. Arthur decided not to send an army, he went himself. And there, among gardens where cherry trees blossomed and music drifted through the air, he saw her for the first time, Guinevere, the king's daughter. Not a princess, but something more like spring itself, dressed in silk. She laughed with her companions, a falcon balanced on her wrist, seemingly unaware that the world grew quiet when she drew near. Arthur stared, and could not look away. He had seen women before heroines, political brides, beautiful faces, but in Guinevere there was something else. She was not trying to be anything, she simply was. When they were introduced and she tilted her head, he realized for the first time in his life he had forgotten how to speak. "You don't look like a king," she said, looking directly at him. "And you don't look like someone else's choice," he replied. They talked all night about justice, about dreams, about how to hold power without wounding those around you. The next morning he told Merlin, "I want to marry her." "Are you certain you want a woman and not a symbol? I'm not choosing a queen. I'm choosing my silence, your peace," he meant. The wedding was modest by royal standards, but all of Camelot hummed with joy. Guinevere walked through the hall in a gown that seemed woven from morning mist, and everyone who watched her believed it. The king was no longer just a ruler. He was a man. The years with her were soft gold. Arthur trusted her. He laughed with her. He kept silence with her, and that silence did not press down. It healed. She was not a warrior, but she was the one who kept Camelot in balance when everything else pulled toward extremes. So was born a queen, not by blood but by soul. Part 7, The Shadow. Even kings clad in armor and surrounded by knights are not protected from the wounds that grow from within. You cannot hide from blood, and in Arthur's blood lived his most complex enemy, not a foreign invader, not a barbarian, not a demon, his sister, Morgan. She was Igraine's daughter from her first marriage, born in a castle that had long since burned. Her childhood passed in stone halls among women who taught submission and men who despised weakness. She grew the way ivy grows in a crack in a wall toward the light but with roots in the dark. Her beauty was northern in quality, not warm or inviting but magnetically cold. But her appearance was not her power. From girlhood, Morgan was drawn to knowledge that others feared. She found forgotten texts, sought out druids, spoke with stars and winds. When they taught her to embroider, she wrote runes into the silk. When they gave her mirrors, she whispered enchantments into the glass. Merlin sensed her. He could feel her pulse in the very air of Camelot. He warned Arthur, "Be careful with her. There is wind in her heart. If you don't warm it, it will become a storm." "She is my family," Arthur replied. "Don't believe in fear when it comes to those I love." "You are confusing blood with closeness," said Merlin. "Not everyone born beside you will walk with you to the end." But Arthur was young. He believed in the better in people. Morgan smiled at him, said the right words, attended councils, made donations. She seemed like the perfect lady. But beyond Camelot's walls, she was building something else entirely. In the northern lands, where people still believed in ancient gods, she gathered followers, the aggrieved, the displaced, those who had found no place in the new order, those who had been quietly pushed out by the arrival of light and justice. She didn't demand blood, she offered meaning. "You don't have to bow," she told them. "You can remember who you were before Arthur became everything." She wasn't building an army, she was growing doubts. In the palace, people began to whisper. Someone found runes carved beneath a stone by the spring. Someone else saw a strange shadow pass through a wall. Servants spoke of mirrors that disappeared, nuits of figures in the smoke. And then something happened that Arthur could not explain. Merlin vanished, he left no letter, no word, no sign, he was simply gone. Some said he had left of his own will, grown tired of mortals, gone to the edge of the world where the river of time loses itself in the mountains and the birds no longer sing. But others spoke in sweeter voices, soft as wind over a graveyard. Morgan. She had lured him, they said drawn him with enchantments into a hidden valley, the valley of shadows, where day and night are woven together, where no one knows the beginning from the end, where even a wizard forgets who he was. Morgan did not boast of it, she simply began to appear more often, to sit closer to the throne, to speak with knights, holding their gaze a moment longer than was proper. She did not issue challenges. She filled the silence that Merlin had left behind, and Arthur he felt the cold. But he couldn't tell where it was coming from. He sat on the throne, but he could sense, beneath it, something was digging. From this moment on he remained king, but he was alone. Part 8. Lancelot and Guinevere. Among all the knights who had gathered beneath Arthur's banners, none shone as brightly as Sir Lancelot. He had come not by summons, not by command, but by a dream. The rumors of the young king who had won not by sword but by mercy of the round table where every man was equal had crossed the sea and reached him. Lancelot left his homeland, renounced his titles, left his mother. He took nothing with him but his armor, his sword, and an ideal. He arrived in Camelot not as a picasserer but as an answer. His eyes were dark as a lake at dawn. His speech simple but precise. He fought like wind, fast, exact, without rage. And everyone who watched him in battle went still, not from fear, from wonder. Arthur received him as a brother, but Merlin, watching Lancelot in silence for a long time, finally said, "You are pure, too pure, and the world only loves that kind of man for a while." Guinevere saw Lancelot that same first day. She said nothing. She looked at him once. She was a queen not by title, but by nature. Wise as morning, beautiful as a song no one can repeat. She did not walk. She moved like water. Her words brought comfort, Her silence carried more weight than any command. Arthur loved her deeply in his way, but quietly, carefully. He was a king. His love was always divided between Guinevere and Britain. He could never be entirely hers. He knew it, she knew it, and Lancelot, he was there, too close, too present. At first, their glances were innocent, accidental. Then came conversations, private ones, and then silences. Long charged silences where everything was said, but nothing was spoken. They both fought it, Guinevere with pride, Lancelot with honor. But feelings, once they have broken through a wall, do not know the word obligation. Lancelot rode away on campaigns for months at a time and returned in silence. Guinevere watched him leave and walked into the garden where no one could see her tears. They knew they were wounding Arthur, but they were not cruel, they were human. And Arthur, he could feel it. The king who could hear the earth could not fail to hear a crack in his own house. He knew. But he never asked, not from weakness, from pain. He understood if he asked, everything would shatter. If he stayed silent, he himself would shatter. And all of this Morgan watched. She had been waiting for this moment. She believed no king could truly be a good man. She wanted to destroy the myth. And at last, on the most solemn day of the year, the midsummer celebration, a feast of songs and peace, one of the knights rose and spoke. A man with a wounded heart and an envious mind. The accusation fell like a stone into still water. The crowd froze. Arthur's face went white. Guinevere said nothing. Lancelot was not in the city. Guinevere was taken into custody not as a prisoner but as a criminal. The people were silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. But at dawn Lancelot returned. He did not shout. He did not demand, he made no speeches. He came for her, not for glory, not for truth. For her, he freed her from confinement, scattering the guards like a storm through autumn leaves. And disappeared. And Camelot cracked. Some knights left, some to follow Lancelot, others simply walked away. Those who remained stayed, but their eyes no longer shone as they once had. The trust was gone, the wallness was gone, the round table was no longer truly round. A crack had appeared in it. It did not destroy the table at once, but it had begun counting down. And Arthur remained. He looked at his sword, and he did not know if it was needed anymore, now that his heart had gone quiet. Part 9. Mordred destruction does not always come with a roar. Sometimes it creeps in. Sometimes it sits right beside you. Sometimes it wears a face in which you recognize your own. Sometimes it whispers, and this whisper had a name, Mordred. He was Arthur's son, but that fact was never spoken aloud in the stone halls, never written in the chronicles, never sung in ballads. He was born of a sin, of a twisted night that the king himself had long refused to look at. His mother was Morgan, the secret no one named, but everyone felt within the walls of Camelot. Mordred grew up alone. Not in poverty, in distance. He knew his blood was royal. He knew it was both his power and his curse. He learned to watch when others spoke, to wait when others rushed forward. In the shadow, what grew was not rage, but silence. Dangerous as a drawn bow. When Arthur learned the truth, he tried to do what was right. He brought Mordred close, gave him a title, gave him the right to stand beside him. Blood is blood, Arthur said. If you reject your family, you yourself become the root of war. But something in Mordred never took hold. He walked through the halls like a guest. He smiled when it was appropriate, but the smile was too even. His voice was calm, but there was no peace in that calm. He did not dream of the throne. He waited. When Camelot began to crack under the weight of the past, he listened. When its pillars fell one by one, he watched. Merlin never returned. Lancelot had vanished into exile, having lost everything he had lived for. Guinevere had retreated to a monastery in white in silence, with eyes in which Arthur could no longer find his own reflection. And then Mordred understood the moment had come. He gathered his forces. Not as a conqueror, as an heir. He did not raise a rebellion. He announced an inheritance. I am the king's son. And if the king himself no longer defends the crown, who, if not I? Camelot continued to crack. Some knights wavered, others were simply tired. Arthur stood alone. He held in his hands neither justice nor love, only his sword. Part 10, the last battle. And so came the battle of Camelot. The dawn was thick with fog, horns sounded, they groaned. The earth trembled not from footsteps but from dread. Arthur put on his old armor, not the ceremonial kind, the one he had worn in his youth. He was no longer young, but on this day he became himself again. Amid the cries, the steel, the blood, the dust, they met. Father and son, king and destruction. They did not shout at each other. They did not curse. They simply raised their swords, Excalibur and Mordred's black blade, truth and despair, light and shadow, they both fell. Mordred's sword found Arthur's chest. Arthur's sword found his son's heart, and everything went still. The fightful knights, those who remained, lifted the dying king. They did not weep. They only looked at the earth as if they had become part of it themselves. They carried Arthur to the lake, the same lake where his legend had begun. He looked out at the water and whispered, "Everything must return to where it came from." One of the knights, Sir Bedivere, who had followed Arthur to the very end, lifted Excalibur and cast it into the water. The surface trembled. And rose the hand, that same white hand, from that other reality. It took the sword, and was gone. Then from across the water came a barge, black, no sail, gliding over the surface like a breath over glass. On it stood three women dressed in white. Their faces were still, not sorrowful, eternal. They took Arthur gently and carried him away into the mist, to Avalon, and to this day no one knows whether he died. Some say he is gone, others that he sleeps, that he will wake when Britain needs a king once more. So the story ends, not with a roar, with a whisper. The fires in the hearth have burned low, the swords have grown quiet, and in the mist only the legends still move. Close your eyes now, let this story carry you into sleep. Because legends, they never truly die, they simply wait for their hour to come. Good night.